Hello, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you very much for joining. Good morning if you're joining from the States. Hello, Shane. Thank you for joining us. So, yeah, I think we're just seeing a few people. We're starting to see people trickle in. So, we're going to talk about customer lifecycle marketing, and particularly why we think it's a big opportunity for growth in B2B, why we think it maybe is the most underdeveloped or the biggest opportunity for B2B marketers in the next 12, 18 months. Certainly we're seeing from our customers, we're seeing lots of interest now in projects around retention, around consumption and adoption, around cross-sell and upsell, analytics projects to segment the customer base, all those kind of things. We're seeing lots of that come up recently. So we're going to try and explore why that is, why customer lifecycle marketing might be such an opportunity, what it is, why we think it's underdeveloped, and what's holding us back, and touch on a couple of the big challenges to getting it going and getting programs up and running. So before we go too much further, Shane, I don't think for most you won't need an introduction, being very well known, a hugely respected voice on the B2B scene, and I always enjoy our chats and learn a lot. But for those who maybe don't know you, could you just do a very brief intro? And I think that particularly why you're passionate about customer lifecycle marketing.
Thank you, David. It's a real pleasure to be invited. And I suppose best to describe myself as a portfolio worker. I'm managing director of a strategic consultancy, Think Direct, my own company, working with large enterprises around the world. But I also, for fun, do training on B2B and speaking on B2B. And I'm also a non-executive director of fast growth businesses. And I suppose my passion for customer lifestyle marketing is because when I very first came into the industry, ancient history, I'm not going to say how long ago, I started my career in data-driven marketing. And I think if you come from that background of using customer data and see the power that it can provide and the insights it can provide, and many of those clients that I worked with very early days were publishers, membership organisations, charities. And I think on the B2B side, that whole database marketing was driven by customer lifestyle marketing. And I think B2B, it's sort of been there, but not so embedded. And I think it's an amazing opportunity for growth. Yeah,
and we'll probably explore some of that. A lot of our audience will be from technology and business services companies. So it would be great to explore some of the, how some of the other B2B industries are doing it, and lessons we can learn from that. So before we go too much further, just to put a bit of context around why we think it is an opportunity and where we are at the moment. So this is a graph from the great people at Corporate Visions. There's a book of theirs called The Expansion Sale, which is definitely worth a read if you're into this topic. And this comes from that, and it shows the amount of investment that's being spent on renewal and upsell and cross-sell efforts. So you can see that yellow bit on the right of the graph is 42% that are spending 0 to 9% of their budget, and there's another 24% of 20% or less. So 2/3 of marketers investing less than 20%. So it is. And would you recognise that, Shane?
Yeah, completely. And in fact, I think the really interesting thing is when you look at that, big yellow segment, the 42%, if you broke that out and separated out retention separately from upsell and cross-sell, my estimate is that would be near as 60% of companies not separating out a budget to devote to retention in B2B. It's really high.
Yeah, and we'll get into why we think perhaps that is and what we can do about it. There was this interesting piece of research that we picked up on as well, just to show some of the emerging opportunity and why I think this is partly happening in response to the pandemic. Certainly it's accelerated it, I think. So this is a study from Bain, and it shows how marketers are responding to the pandemic and some of the things that they've done, and it separates winning marketers from the rest. It's not completely clear from the article why they're winning, but it shows that those marketers, the winning marketers, are spending more time focusing on campaigns targeting their current customers. And as I say, that that definitely backs up our experience anecdotally with customers asking. I guess there's just that sense from the pandemic. If you've been through that, and you're lucky enough, as probably most of the people on this webinar will be, that you've still got customers, you're sort of so grateful for that, that you want to go and wrap your arms around them, don't you? And it's a natural response to want to spend more time focusing on that and the growth opportunity that they are.
Yes, and I think, David, it was also partly a response to the fact that lead gen was just so difficult, particularly, reflecting back to last March, with so many B2B organisations relying on large events, for example, and they just didn't happen. So it was suddenly, what are we going to do? And I think you're right. There was this sudden realisation, gosh, we are all in this together, and actually we ought to be looking after our customers. There was a sort of a reflection inwardly, I think, that expressed itself in this refocus.
Yeah, absolutely. I should also say, just before we go on, that we'd like this to be interactive, this session, so there will be some polls that we're going to be doing, live polling, and please do put your questions in the Q&A, and we will try and answer them as we go. So don't wait till the end. If you want to raise a question or a point, or just tackle us, please do put something in the Q&A, and we'll try and get to it as best we can. So I think this is important, just to start by saying what do we mean by customer lifecycle marketing quickly. Perhaps how does it differ from ABM? And I'll just put you on the spot, Shane. Can you try and give us a one-sentence definition of what it is we're talking about?
This is actually surprisingly difficult. I think in B2C it's easy, because I would just answer it's from cradle to grave. And there's lots of great consumer organisations who do exactly that. A bit more challenging in B2B, and I think we're going to explore why. But for me, it's much more than a campaign. It's thinking about the right sort of customer that you want to acquire in the first place, all the way through to their lifetime value. And how long they stay with you. The challenge, of course, in B2B is it's an organisation that spends its money, but it's actually emotional and rational buying triggers from individuals. So that's why this is challenging, a big topic.
Yeah, there's a couple of things in there. Lifetime value, I think, is crucial to the whole business case for it, but that distinction between the psychology of the individual, where sometimes you're persuading people to do things like consumption, is quite one-to-one sometimes, versus the psychology of renewal, versus how that differs to an acquisition scenario. There's loads of stuff that we can get into. So I'm just going to get something off my chest as well now. We're going to do a poll first. Sorry. So first poll: how would you describe the status of customer lifecycle marketing in your organisation at the moment? So it should be coming up on your screen if you hit one of the options. We'll come to that in a minute. How would you describe the current state, Shane? Why do we think it's underdeveloped at the moment?
I think it goes back to this difference between the sort of the corporate spending the money, and is this a strategy that's embedded in the way that you look at organisations? And this is where perhaps it comes into, you mentioned about ABM, account-based marketing. The companies I'm seeing that are more advanced are the ones who are thinking about the big corporates who spend a lot of money with them. They want to retain them, they want to cross-sell, they want to up, and they've done a lot of work in ABM. But it's not necessarily a strategy that applies across all B2B accounts. And then you've got the other lens, which is where people have started because they've maybe bought the technology, the marketing automation technology, and they started this journey because they realised they can do always-on campaigns. So there's a sort of almost a collision, if you like, in the middle, I think, that's happening. But I think it's quite interesting to see the results of this poll and where people are.
Yeah, I think, diffuse ownership, I think, as well, is a big part of it. Marketing is so clearly focused on acquisition in most B2B companies, and that ownership of the customer is less clear, or the customer marketing at least. So we hopefully got some results. Let's see if we can have a look at the results. So
is that your experience, David, and the clients that you've been working with, that actually that ownership of the customer is more driven by sales, do you think? We've got the results coming in now. It's interesting.
Well, I think our experience is the ownership of the customer runs across several departments, and actually when we're looking at programs around renewal, part of the task is really to shine a light on how disparate that ownership is, because it's kind of grown up organically and piecemeal, and there's customer success and there's servicing and there's sales and there's account management, and they all own different parts, but the journey across it, then it becomes quite complex. So that's kind of part one is shining a light on that. So yeah, we've got 43% saying early days still, and only 5% have a mature program. So there we go. That backs up the idea that there's plenty of opportunity there. Really interesting. So yeah, just on that definition point, I think this is me getting something off my chest a bit. This is Googling customer lifecycle marketing, and this is the sort of chart that you get. This is from Smart Insights, who are great, love Smart Insights, do lots of good stuff. But it's basically a list of digital tactics, and the customer bit is right at the end. There's no strategy in here, and I think this is not what we're talking about. I think certainly you and I, Shane, it's how do you strategically think about your customers? They're not all uniform, so how do you segment them? How do you target them? How do you position to different groups? So we've attempted our definition here, and in the heart is there might be other strategies that you can have, but there's a simple triad there that we've got. Are you trying to deploy? Is the customer in the early stages? Develop them? Is it a case of defend? So what's your strategy first and foremost? How are you segmenting your base? And then how do you think about that through the whole journey of the customer? And so this is not prospect, but once they've started and all the way through to renewal and advocacy. And as we've talked about, there's quite a bit of different psychology that's going on through that journey, which we might get to unpick a bit as we go. So why is it important? Why is it important now? We'll talk about this in a minute. This is one of our, this is giving away one of our insights here, that part of it I think is about consumption. So the next poll is: consumption of your product or service is a strong indicator of customer lifetime value. How strongly do you agree with that statement? And I think, in some cases in cloud companies, for example, that there was an obvious correlation, but I also think in services companies, I suspect the correlation is very strong. Certainly, the more engagement in the product service, the more likely they are to get value out of it and stay with it for a long time. But we shall see, and while we get those results in, we'll talk a bit more about why we think it matters now. And we spoke a bit about this previously, Shane, and there are kind of three things that we picked out. I know you're quite passionate about the marketers being under pressure to do more with less, and this being a way that you can do that. Can you just explain?
Yes, I mean, I think, B2B marketers, we know we've all been on a journey to be seen and to deliver as a revenue generation function, not as a support function. But I think there's much more to it than that. I think we perhaps haven't looked at ourselves with enough of a lens of, are we an efficient department? We've maybe looking at the effectiveness of our marketing and the results, which is great, and we're all on a journey with that. Although again, we're back to challenges because of the problem, the 18-month average length of sale in B2B, and in some clients I've got 7 years or more. So goodness, trying to join the dots there is really, really tough. But I think there is this understanding that we've got to do more. We've got to be more efficient, more effective. So I think that's why lifecycle marketing is really now, and there's a lot more we can do, definitely.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting, and the unprecedented times is obviously should be a banned phrase, but I think one of the things that we've seen is, as customers look to try and navigate the uncertainty, those organisations that have been able to, as I say, wrap their arms around their customers and work together to plan routes out of, routes through the pandemic, new business models, new ways of working, etc. So there's been a lot of co-creation and innovation. I think that feels like an important, upshot of the pandemic that we should perhaps keep hold of.
I agree, and I think that there was that real willingness, because there was that real sense of, we're all in this together. This is completely, we're all trying to help each other, and I think the companies that enabled that really early really got the benefits of it, and that sort of is lots talked about partnership marketing, but the demonstration was the organisations that empowered their staff to help their customers. It wasn't just sales staff, it was any staff. And I think that's really, there was then this realization, we should just be doing this all the time. This is just good business practice. So I think it has changed the lens a lot.
Yeah, great. There's a question actually we've got here from Louis, who I'm pleased to see is the first to ask a question on virtual webinars as he is on face-to-face events as well. But it's a great question, and he says that the full potential of customer lifetime value and realizing that needs to be the motivator, but what needs to change in the mentality of many B2B organizations which are focused on net new name sales to give the right focus to the area? What's the sort of light bulb moment that needs to happen? He references the Kotler quote, it's 6 times more expensive to attract a new customer than to retain an existing one. There's probably only so many times that we can, people can say that. It's become, I guess, a bit of a cliche, hasn't it? So how do we land that focus on customer lifetime value and start to make the business case?
Yeah, I don't know what you think about this, David, but to me, a lot of the problem is structural within an organisation. It's just simply the way it's organised. So it's not just the mentality of a B2B organisation. They've got to recognise that this is important to start with. And I always go in when I do a piece of strategy work, and it's often about, how do we grow? All the focus is on new customers, new markets. And I always start with, well, can we look at your existing ones, please? What's your churn? What's the cross-selling? And if you've got different departments, I've even been in organisations, B2B ones, which are set up to compete against each other with product lines or service lines. And that is, that's certainly not good for the customer. So there's this, it's not just the thinking, but it's recognising your company culture and structure for me are important. I don't know what you find with your clients. Yeah,
I think that the tension comes in the fact that there's this long payoff, isn't there? And often it's quarterly driven revenue cycles and desperate need to be present for sales and to show that we're doing something to support sales. And then, against that, you've got this potentially 18 months, 2 years, 3 years payoff from a renewal point of view, or a customer lifetime value might take place over 3 to 5 years. So it's building the case for how do you get investment that's going to pay off over that time frame. And I think it does come back to, I wrote an article on ABM recently that said actually it's both about the measures and the metrics and the belief, because you can build a business case on customer lifetime value, and you can set some leading indicators that say actually if the net promoter score or if the engagement levels go like this, we can see from our analysis of what's happened in the past that this will make them more likely to stay, and we'll get more money from them and they'll be more profitable. But there has to also be a kind of ethos to want to do that, I guess. So it's probably quite a big internal comms effort that's needed to, and similarly with ABM, how do you find the champions that are going to support the cause? Where do you find a project that you can pilot and then get some momentum behind it and so on? So I can see we're getting lots of questions starting to flood in now, which is great. Let's just have a look at the poll results from the poll if we can. Okay, so
That's good to see. Strongly agree, and agree. You know, the 49% and 33%. That's great, and I think it relates to one of the questions that's come through in the chat about, you know, that correlation of customer lifetime value to consumption. And in my experience, the companies who are brilliant at this are the ones who really use that data to show the stickiness. You know, the more products you sell, how much impact does that have on stickiness? And certainly, you know, leading companies like used to be Viking, Office Depot, doing deep analytics to how many products you need to sell to increase retention by 2 or 3 times. And I think Anna Hutton mentions, you know, what using propensity model can really help show you that business case of the more products you sell, the more sticky they are. My only point about that, I am a huge fan of propensity modelling, developed models in the past for things like, did want to develop one for generous companies. You know, the companies that are more generous towards their employees behave very differently to others. We've just got to be a bit careful, I think, at the moment in the current climate, that some of our indicators would have been leading indicators in the past are not necessarily predictive of future customer behaviour. And there's a whole other webinar topic, but just a bit of care going on there for propensity modelling.
Can you give us an example?
Well, I think the best analogy I like to use is that an analyst, and I am not an analyst, I'm one of these people who, once the analysts have done their job, I tell the story. But they described it to me as, and so Shane, you've got to remember that the data you have collected is a bit like you're trying to drive down the M1 and navigate by looking in your rear view mirror. And I think that's a really good analogy. That things, a really good example is if you took data in B2B at the moment from filling in web forms and things, and we're asking for your business address, most people are putting in their home address. That's a classic data point that has changed massively. And therefore, you know, that's if you want to be sent something like a report. Now, how you use that data, whether you're even storing it, is going to have a big impact on how you treat that customer going forwards. And I think it's that level, that granularity that you really need to understand. Something fundamental has changed. They've given you a piece of data for a moment in time, but when they're back in the office, maybe, you know, June, July, who knows? We don't know. They might not be happy if you continue to use that.
Yeah. So this data is something we might come on to more. This point about stickiness, I think, was you mentioned in the analysis about number of products versus retention, and I think also there's this, you know, obviously there's a shift to everything being offered as a service, and therefore consumption and adoption becomes a big driver of revenue. And there's a, you know, so suddenly I think that's going to be a big and growing focus for marketers, because it is going to be driving the revenue number more and more. But there's quite a different psychology to that, I think. So I think, you know, the acquisition of psychology is you're persuading someone of the need to change. Renewal psychology is you're persuading somebody of the need to stay. But in between that, you've got this kind of, you're talking often to the individual users of products. How do you break habits, the old habits, create new habits, reinforce? And does it then become a little bit more like some B2C marketing, perhaps?
I think that's such an important insight. I think some of the tech firms have been quick to realise this, that, you know, renewal is driven by usage, and where there are still some B2B organisations I work with that use the academic term that they rely on structural loyalty, and i.e. embedded loyalty, which isn't loyalty at all. It's a contract. You know, you can't shift your contract, but changing in the SaaS world with, you know, just a rolling, always on monthly license. All of the stats shows that, you know, if your users aren't using it, then when somebody does bother to look at it, they'll just go, well, we're not going to renew that license. I mean, a good example everybody's familiar with is paying for LinkedIn Sales Navigator. And that's a really good example, because lots of sales teams take out the license, they do not all use it. And anybody, you know, who's reviewing their marketing and sales budget should be looking at that usage. And if they're not using it, say, well, actually, until you're trained and you're using it and we're getting a result from it, we're going to turn that off because it costs a lot of money. So I think, you know, the tech companies are very aware of that. So really try and drive usage, and lots of other B2B organizations could really learn from that.
Yeah. Okay, I'm going to try and sort of move us on a little bit to talk about the two challenges as we see it. A couple of brief, quick examples of co-creating this with ServiceNow, you know, releasing their workflow apps to customers during the pandemic, and a great bit of PR about this. My favourite piece of innovation through the pandemic, sort of just a quick humorous interlude, was this small farm in California who had a lot of their revenue came from in-person visits from goats and so on to, you know, schools, etc. in the area. So how did they replace that revenue? They had the genius idea of goat to meetings. If anyone hasn't seen that, I feel like cheers their day up as much as it did mine when I found this. You can invite a goat or a llama to join your Zoom call. I don't think we've got any goats or llamas registered for this webinar, sadly. But next
I love this. It's brilliant.
And just talking about that psychology bit, we'll share the slides with the attendees afterwards. But this is you know, there's so much in the behavioural science space about biases and nudging and how you change behaviours that's really important to that consumption and adoption type of campaign. And we've got this model where we've basically simplified it down to these 6 areas, and we call it the change model. Nice acronym. I think it looks like a bit of a discarded piece of Madonna's stage kit, but that probably says more about my mind than anything else. So we will share these slides afterwards, so people can sort of dig into that a bit more.
I think there's just on that point, Deb, because I really love these models, because I think they help take the thinking on. I mean, you've gone through them quite quickly, but they go to the heart of it, and I think they're very powerful. So I'd urge people to spend some time looking at them. Yeah, and we just basically collected a few of the most common biases in each of those areas, just as a sort of mind map tool to help people think about that. And I think some of the things like social proof and status quo bias are really interesting in that consumption space, because, and it goes back to that point we mentioned about ABM. You know, you need to get the salespeople on board who are then championing it and then shouting to the other salespeople who start getting on board, and you get that snowball effect. So, and I spotted a question in the thread around, you know, how important is customer service, and it's a bit like you said, you know, the social proof. If you've got really horrific problems in your customer service around delivery, there was a fantastic sort of viral joke going the rounds of sort of Twitter and Instagram, which was basically the summary of the different delivery customers from the experiences using, say, Royal Mail versus the other providers, and they absolutely nailed it. You know, it was like, well, Royal Mail, you'll get the card through the door, but you never see the item delivered. And then there were the other ones that also sort of talked about the different customer experience. I won't name them, but and it was a joke, but it was actually went to the heart of it, which all this data about how your customers think of you is out there in the social world. So I think this is really important. We look beyond marketing for these very important views of what our customers think.
One of the questions is, do we think sales recognise these behavioural emotional drivers versus the rational arguments in a customer scenario? I think they would use, I find that they do, but they use different language. I don't know if that's your experience, Shane. They probably don't start to use heuristic and primacy effect and stuff like that, but they're very good instinctive psychologists, the good ones.
Yeah, and I think they're getting, I mean, I think sort of the things like crystal nose and other techniques which we're using in marketing to adapt our marketing messaging to the personas. Actually, savvy salespeople, you know, you can plug crystal nose into LinkedIn, are also, they've always been good at it, but they're actually now becoming more formally trained. And you certainly see this, or I see this when I receive calls from American tech vendors. You just know they've done the personality profiling on you, which is quite interesting in itself.
Yeah, it is, yeah. Yeah, and you sort of like frighteningly like, am I the sort of person who would respond to that? I guess I must be. So let's get to the next poll question then. So this is about ownership. Who owns developing messages and content for customer marketing? Now, is it marketing, or does it share with other departments? Is it sales? Where does it sit? No clear ownership. Give people a minute to answer that. I mean, we've talked about this, haven't we, a bit? This is a problem. This is a typical B2B marketing org. It's very acquisition focused. You'll have someone on demand gen, digital, products and so on. Is there a way you've seen it work where there's been a kind of structural change that's helped people get momentum?
Absolutely. I think the ones leading it are the ones where I've seen, that there isn't just a CMO, but it's a head of sales and marketing. The function is one. You can't, you'd end up be schizophrenic and having an argument with yourself, really. But there's organisations, as we know, that have gone way beyond that with the chief customer officer. So I think there is that recognition of trying to take, this joined up end-to-end view of how a customer experiences your business, and trying to embed that in some way into your company structure, because there's no doubt, to me, this is the fundamental biggest barrier to great customer lifecycle marketing. If you've got your demand team sitting in one team, maybe your digital marketing team in another, sales in another, and then maybe the customer journey post sale is owned by customer service, that's not joined up, and it's hard to do customer lifecycle because of that.
Yeah, it's quite an endemic challenge for B2B marketing. It generally might be an indicator of where the industry could go. I think if you look at some of the other sort of service-based industries, outsourcing, you look at something like global business services, which, as my understanding is exactly this challenge where you've broken up what is an end-to-end process into discrete parts, and it becomes dysfunctional, and then you put it back together with teams that are focused around customer marketing, but they bring together all those skills, so multi-skilled teams but focused on the business.
Yeah, and I think you mentioned ABM earlier, but it's interesting that some of the leading, you mentioned ServiceNow, and I think they're a great example of that, but other ones like BT that have got global teams around the customer. It's a global customer team, and all the functions needed to support that customer are in that team.
Yeah, it's interesting. Let's see what the poll says then, if we can. Okay, so it's a shared responsibility. Interestingly, only 20% no clear ownership. So perhaps people do feel that there is some clarity, but it's spread. Interesting. Okay, so the second challenge that I think is probably the big one, the business case, because then you can start to solve the ownership problem as soon as you've got a business case. So final poll, there's two questions here. I think we'll do one and then the other. We'll see how that works. So how much of your budget is given to customer cross-sell, upsell and retention? Now, as we had that graph earlier from corporate visions, you can answer them both at once. That's great. And do you think that that's too much, about right, or too little? So where are we? Are we under investing at the moment or not? While we wait.
There's an interesting challenge that underlies this for some people, and there was a bit of a thread that was coming out in the questions, which was around, are you in growth markets? So if you've got existing customers who are in growth markets, you're fine. But I think one of the challenges is for some organisations that are selling into markets at the moment that are in free fall, and we all know which ones they are, retail and others, then you've got a big problem because you're not going to see your growth from those verticals. So I think there's an overlay to this, David. I don't know what you think as to how far some companies can go down this route if they are in verticals that actually haven't got a lot of growth opportunity.
Mm. Yeah, I think the other sort of logical conclusion is that there is going to be more intense competition in those areas where there are growth, because there are some industries which are really struggling, and there are some which are still growing, and everybody's pivoting to those industries where there is growth, and so that increased competitiveness means that you're going to have to run fast to stay still. So you're going to have to really make sure you look after your customers to retain them, and B, net new customer acquisition is going to be harder. So you will have to think about the options that you have to grow, and therefore, it makes a lot of sense to look at the existing customer base. And I think we'll spend a little last few minutes talking about the business case and how we develop it. Let's have a look at those results. So that pretty much reflects the first results reflect the graph from earlier, perhaps even more dramatic.
Like 60%. No, I'm happy.
You knew your audience, Shane. And yes, 75% too little. So the marketers believe we should be investing more, which teases up nicely. How do we start to build that? How do we start to build the case with the people who are holding the purse strings in the organisation? What do we think of what's the starting point, Shane?
Yeah, I think it is hard. I mean, I don't want to understate. It's lovely coming, knowing that we should do something, and those proof points, as I say, they are there. They are in the data, but it's not always easy to get your hands on. But if you can prove, and many of us in B2B, have to answer to very short-termist quarterly cycles, and I know that's something, David, that you and I have talked about. But if you can prove that you can deliver some results within the year by increasing the share of wallet with your client, then that's got to be the right place to start. What's interesting, I talked to a really great CMO who I really admire, Andrew Colwell. He said that he used the pandemic to win the argument with the board that he hadn't been able to win for the previous 2 years, which was that he knew if he could change the pricing structure of one of their products, and not have to put customers on contract, that it would fly. The pandemic allowed him to do that because they were just desperate to try anything. And it was, well, we can't get sign off because we can't get the contracts through because people are working from home. And within 3 months, it absolutely proved that actually they shouldn't be worried about contractual loyalty, but that if you take away the barriers to onboarding people, then people will buy from you.
Mm. Yeah, there is a bit of taking the leap involved, isn't there? There's a certain amount of detail on this slide, but it's a kind of canvas that builds on that model that we showed earlier. But on the right hand side is some of the KPIs, and clearly those revenue numbers like share of wallet, consumption, customer lifetime value, and so on, could be some way down the line. So are there some of those leading indicators that we can measure and use those data points to show the correlation?
I agree. I think there's finding early flags that you are onto a winner. And I did some work 2 years ago with Maersk Drilling, and as you can imagine, if you're selling an oil rig, it's a very, very long cycle. And so they were looking for really early indicators of engagement that would show that they were going to have a better chance of winning a contract. And one of theirs pre-COVID lockdown was actually visits to a rig to check them out and check their competency out by an operations person that was buying from BP or Shell, whoever it was. And they've actually now spoken about it, but that drove their strategy at being of COVID to realise that if they couldn't fly people out to a rig, that was going to impact on their whole pipeline. So they created a virtual visit to rig experience. And they've said actually for them, that's been hugely important, because actually that can go to not just the person, the safety officer who wants to visit, but they can send that to the board of Shell or BP, which I think is just phenomenal. So there are early indicators. If you know the right thing to do, you know, look for those, and then you know down the road that you'll get there in the lifetime value.
Yeah, and it's again, it's about, you know, about building and winning that argument. A lot of this is about the business case is there to rationalize an argument that you're having, and perhaps have been having for a while with people in the business. And you know, those tools of persuasion, some of the psychology pieces like we talked about, like social proof, is probably a big one, because I think if somebody feels that major competitor A is really suddenly investing in customer lifecycle marketing, then board are going to be much more interested in a program to look at customer lifecycle marketing.
And the top tip from me, I mean, anybody looking at this and wanting a place to start, if they haven't started, just look at churn, because you can if you're losing customers, why are you losing them? If you can stop the leaky bucket, you know, that it's just such a great place, and there's always things that can be done there. The challenge might be there around service issues, or they might be around product issues which are outside the remit of marketing, but they're not. You know, if your job is to drive profit and growth, then, you know, that's where you should put your effort.
Yeah. Very good. Let's see if there's any other questions. How do we build a business case? Equations to build a business case can be complex. Any tips on how to do this effectively without just guessing? Yeah, I mean, I guess you do have to, if it's complex, it's probably not going to travel well inside the organization. So there is some work that you have to do. What I often talk about swagger stories, so they're a way of just actually, this is how information travels, is generally by anecdote. So how can you create the little 1 or 2 line version of your story? This is what the competitor's doing. We did this and we saw that, type of storytelling. I don't know if you've got any tips there,
I would absolutely echo that. I think, you know, where you've got, you know, the knowledge that you've got within, you know, your agency, and helping a client tell the story. Often I find that internally marketing teams struggle to tell their own story, and actually where they use their agency to do that is enormously helpful, because, you know, what are the preconceptions of the board that you're trying to overcome? And I agree with you about swagger stories or quick wins, that getting some hero examples from sales, for example, are all really important. So it's just looking for those low-hanging fruit, really. That's really the important part.
Yeah. And, you know, analytics, we talked about data and analytics, but, you know, there's a couple of projects that we've done recently that are just starting there with how do you segment your base? Where are the upsell and cross-sell opportunities? Where are the migration opportunities? Where are the retention risks? Okay, let's literally identify how many accounts there are. Let's think about what the conversion rate should be if we improve the program, and then we've got a number that says, okay, that's something that's worth investing in. We all agreed on that.
Yeah, and I think you can do it in a campaign way as well. I mean, you know, the classic lifetime value, you know, Sabrina mentioned here, the equations are complex, and they're based on frequency of purchase, recency of purchase, amounts spent, and category, the FRAC model, underlying lifetime value. So if you can choose some really simple product bundling to prove this, then that moves you a long way forward in the more complex sale.
Yes. And yeah, question here about, you know, how do you measure reception and brand perception, some of those things on the right, without spending a lot on research? Any tips gratefully received. There's some really interesting stuff at the moment on share of search as a proxy for brand awareness. So if you're interested in that, just Google that, share of search. It's a guy called Les Binet or Binet, I have no idea which of the two, but he's very good on this subject. So he's B2C really, but the rules should apply. So any final words, Shane?
I love the canvas. I think it's there's lots here for people to take away and think round, do your own SWOT analysis on it, really. Where are you good and where are you weak? And where are the ones you can get some, some quick wins. I find it really interesting that there's quite a lot of people at the moment, and because it's a trend, that are jumping into advocacy and investing in that area. And there's some far easier, in my opinion, things that they could be sorting out and should be sorting out before they do some of these programs. But that's just as a personal bias.
Yes. I think from my point of view, it's listening. I think that's the bit that I keep, as a marketer, keep kind of having to, like, big sticker on the wall saying, try and spend time listening to the customers. So there's one or two things that we're doing at the moment just to try and make sure we've got more time with our customers, not talking about the projects, but talking about how they see their world evolving and what they want from agencies and so on. So that would be a good place to start from my tip. So thank you very much, Shane. I'm sure we could have gone on for another 45 minutes very happily, but thank you very much for your time and all your great insight. And thank you everybody for joining us. We'll make sure we share the slides with all the attendees afterwards. Hope you have a good rest of the afternoon.
Thank you very much for inviting me, David. A real pleasure.
Bye-bye.